kind of read a little bit about your background for the audience today, if those people are not familiar. Tom Wheeler became the 31st chairman of the Federal Communications Commission on November 4th, 2013, and served until January 20th, 2017. Chairman Wheeler was appointed by President Barack Obama and was unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate. For over 3 decades, Chairman Wheeler has been involved with new telecommunication networks and services, experiencing the revolution in telecommunications as a policy expert, an advocate, and a businessman. As an entrepreneur, he started or helped start multiple companies offering innovative cable, wireless, and video communication services. He is the only person to be selected to both the Cable Television Hall of Fame and the Wireless Hall of Fame. And the reason I tell you this is because of the quote from President Obama, who made him the Bo Jackson of telecom. So I think that's a pretty good bio, pretty impressive. So welcome back to NABOE after a few years, and it's great to see you.
Well, Ron, it's wonderful to be back with you all, and I blame my friend Bill Rozak for introducing us in the first place. I'm going to try. I'm supposed to be the tech guy here, but I've been having a hard time. Here we go. Let's see. Here. Okay. Wanted to bring up some.
Oh, good.
Some screenshots here that we can use. Starting, of course, with a blatant plug for the book, and I appreciate the kind words that you said about it, Ron. You know, I wrote this book in order to explore the effects of new technology, especially new network technology, on commerce and culture. And the conclusion that I've reached is that technological change has always produced consternation and upheaval, and the challenge, as is our challenge today, is how do you deal with that in the greater scope of things. This, for instance, is a tweet that went viral a couple of years ago that said, here are the things that we take for granted today that didn't exist in 2003. And you just kind of go through that list and you go, oh my golly, you know, so many of those things are common parts of my life today. And then you stop and consider how things have continued since then. An algorithm recently signed a music contract with Warner Music, not Beyonce, an algorithm. 50%, over 50% of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 at the beginning of this century don't exist anymore because of the impact of change. We got a 100-year high in wealth disparity. We've got problems with how you deal with data, all the data that's being collected about us. And the bottom line is this all ends up affecting what is the democratic experience, not just here, but around the world. This is the response that we all seem to have to these kind of changes. Oh my God, what's going on? Stop the world. You know, I want to get off. And the message from Gutenberg to Google is that those people who go around and say, oh, I've never seen anything. We have never seen any change like this before, are wrong. You know, consider, for instance, the printing press. It was the original information revolution, and it ended the centralized control of information, gave us the scientific method and the science revolution. And we'll talk some more about that in a second. Or consider the first high-speed network, the railroad, that ended the dominance of geography and distance over how we all lived our lives, or the telegraph that ended the dominance of time as a controlling factor in our lives. And so my thesis in the book is that these stories are the history of our future, and that we see two things coming at it. One is that there has been a Darwinian evolution of technology. For instance, if you unpack the zeros and ones of computer code, it takes you back to Johannes Gutenberg and the printing press. Because the brilliance of what Gutenberg did was not putting ink on paper and taking a wine press and using that to make imprints, but it was that whereas everybody else had seen information on the page, he saw it in its smallest usable piece. And that's what digital code is. The zeros and ones of the digital environment take information, break it down into its smallest usable piece, and reuse it. It traces directly back to the concepts of Johannes Gutenberg. Or consider the microprocessor, and you can trace it back to the steam locomotive. You know, it happened that that at the first commercial run of a steam locomotive in the UK, first one in the world, there was present a man by the name of Charles Babbage, who was a mathematician, and he's had this aha moment that said, why can't, if we can harness steam to do physical labor, why can't we harness steam to do intellectual labor? And he spent the rest of his life designing what today we recognize as the first computer. He conceptualized from whole cloth all of the components that we see today in a computer, and he was using at that point in time 19th century technologies of gears and wheels and spokes and spikes, but it was a computing device that actually worked and built the model for going forward. So that evolution of technology relates to what we're doing today, but it also relates to the world that we're inheriting today. Because the other thing that we know is that these revolutions drive upheaval in social and economic activity. So for instance, the printing press was the key to the Reformation. That Martin Luther, his ideas that led to the Reformation and literally set Europe ablaze, his ideas weren't unique, but he had access to the first mass medium to be able to spread those ideas. And so it gave us the Reformation. It also gave us the Renaissance. You know, the ideas that were the Renaissance would have stayed in northern Italy had it not been for the ability of inexpensive printing to spread those ideas and then to be challenged by other ideas and begin the debate that we call the scientific method. So here are a couple of seminal, transformational moments that we can trace directly back to this technology. Same holds true with the railroad. The railroad enabled the Industrial Revolution. One of the wonderful little factoids that I love in the book is, what does it take to make a plow? And before the Industrial Revolution, a couple of blacksmiths doing 11 different tasks would spend 118 hours to make a plow. After the railroad enabled raw materials to be brought to a central point where they could be fabricated in mass production and then distributed back to a connected market, that changed to 52 men doing 97 different tasks and producing the same plow in less than 4 hours. And that obviously had a significant impact, trickle down then through the rest of the economy. So what we're living through right now is how those things are coming together. So for instance, this ubiquitous connectivity that started with a printing press, went to the telegraph, the telephone, and now ubiquitous wireless connectivity, and low-cost computing that started with Mr. Babbage and the steam engine, went to the mainframe. Moore's law talks about reducing them to chips, and now we're at a point where we have ubiquitous chips, where these two things, which was for the last 50 years, have really been moving in parallel, have suddenly had sex and changed our realities. You know, I had as Ron knows, I see you smiling, Ron. I actually use that line in the book. There is a one-sentence paragraph that says, "And then they had sex." I got a call from a friend of mine in New York who said, "I can't believe your publisher let you keep that line in there." But that's the reality of what has happened, and it has produced a new environment for us where everything communicates and everything computes. And our leadership challenge in this kind of an environment is no different from the leadership challenge that folks faced in the first information revolution, during the Industrial Revolution, and that is, how are we going to deal with it? And one of the conclusions of my book is that you don't deal with it by running away from it. That is what our leadership challenge is. And so I try to talk about several conclusions that we can draw that might help inform us along the way. One is that this concept of the good old days is fake history. You know, the good old days weren't. The challenges that we think are unique today, we have seen before in earlier times of technological revolution. That technology upheaval leads to economic upheaval, leads to social upheaval, and creates our own set of leadership challenges that we each then need to step up to. One of the concepts that I talk about in the book is that it is never the primary network revolution that is transformational, but the secondary effects that it enables. And those secondary effects are things that you and I then get challenged by. Let me give you an example. These are three of my favorite charts. In a similar period of time, the growth of the railroad, the growth of the telegraph, fueled the growth of American cities and defined the map that we all take for granted today. It also brought incredible problems. And here's just a few. You get all these people together, you get all kinds of health problems like cholera, crime. You got to deal with how public safety for crime and fire. You know, you used to be living on the farm where you had all kinds of privacy. Now you're living in tenements with thin walls and open windows, and you have no privacy. How are you going to educate workers so that they can read the manuals on the shop floor? How are you going to deal with the fact that lots of people are getting sick and it's not the town doc challenge anymore? And we came up with new institutions to deal with each of those. And it was not an easy process. But we did decide to find common solutions, and those are the things that we take for granted today. Let me show you a chart that shows how this kind of thing relates to us today. Two periods of technological upheaval: the early industrial revolution and the early internet revolution, reflected in these two charts. And what we find is that when technology created a great wealth disparity, there was also a corresponding disparity or corresponding polarization in American politics. And we have just come out of our own election, where we have seen this kind of polarity in our politics. And the only point I make is not to be judgmental here, but just to say this ain't new. We've been here before. We've dealt with it before. The second great lesson, I think, is, and I love this quote from John Gardner, is that history doesn't look like history when you're living it. And here's the definition of our history: that there is a new capital asset in the 21st century, and that's data. You can see here the curve in the growth of data that is being created. And that data is the capital asset that drives the economy. You know, the Economist had this great cover story in which they talked about data as the new oil. It's a great metaphor, but it's not right. I mean, yes, it is the new capital asset of the 21st century. But here's the thing that makes it different from every other capital asset in history: it's inexhaustible. You know, the railroads enabled raw materials to be brought to a central point, to be fabricated, and then taken back out to an interconnected market. But once those raw materials were used, they were gone. That's not true of data. You know, when Facebook gets a new user, it's using the same data files that you and I use. And we have got into a situation where we have a perpetual motion machine, where data creates products, which create data, which create new products, which creates new data. And it is an economic reality that we have never seen before. And 47% of that data that is collected in this chart on the left-hand side is data about you and me. We have become glass people. Now, this is a cartoon that I love. That, you know, we all remember the cartoon, the Great New Yorker cartoon from the 1990s, in the early days of the internet. You know, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And then over on the other side is the reality now is that you've got a couple of spooks who are saying they know everything about that dog. While this is talking about government getting information on us, the reality is that it's corporations who know more about us now than government. I mean, the data that is held on us by big tech would make Big Brother green with envy. And you know, within the last week, for instance, we saw a story that the Defense Department is buying data on each of us from commercial firms that have been collecting it as we leave our digital fingerprints all over everything that we do. So it should come as no surprise that huge majorities of Americans think that we need to do something about it. That we've lost control of our personal data, that we need some kind of new rules. So I call what's going on today in the data economy digital alchemy, where they're really taking something that is your information and my information, personal information, and transforming it into a corporate asset. That data delivers all kinds of new and exciting things. That data also ends up controlling the market economy by its being hoarded by a handful of companies. So one of the challenges that we face, and this was one of the issues that I dealt with, you know, when I was chairman, is that the history that we know and we've seen repeatedly is that innovators make the rules. And they should make the rules because only they see where the future is going. But at some point in time, they begin to impose on the public interest and individual rights. And at that point in time, there is a need to step up and say, time out, we need a set of rules. You know, in the late 19th and early 20th century, we developed a set of guardrails for industrial capitalism that protected workers, protected consumers, protected competition, and protected capitalism. Because we forget about all of the efforts back in the early 20th century for socialism, communism, even fascism as a way of dealing with the change that was confronting everybody. And that's the kind of challenge that we're now living through and that we have to decide, what are we going to deal with? So as we stand at our historic moment, there are more existential challenges that we need to come to grips with. This picture can't really make out the details, but this is from China, and this is how the Chinese government can track the activities of each individual Chinese. These associated with each of these people or each of these cars are specific data points. That China has harnessed technology for authoritarian control. This statement by Vladimir Putin is terrifying in and of itself, because he's saying the logical extension of what we saw in the previous slide is that the liberal democratic idea has become obsolete. So what is a liberal democracy? It's a representative democracy with the rule of law that is equally applied. And what we're finding when we go to try and do that is that the search for stability in these times of change, the fact that we don't have a time buffer anymore that allows us to evolve into the change has led to a rise in authoritarianism around the world. And in our country, it's given us a situation of slogans posing as solutions. So our challenge, we talked about how throughout history, every time there's been a new technology, there have been all kinds of new challenges created. Our challenge is, how are we going to protect the unum? The founding fathers made our national motto, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. How do we protect the coming together that is necessary for the success of democracy when forces, technologically driven forces, are driving us apart? Democracy requires that we overcome our tribalism. We are inherently a tribal creature. Human beings are tribal creatures. Democracy has always worked because we said, okay, there is something to be gained by everybody by dealing with these issues collectively. The challenge that we're facing is that the business model of the digital economy drives us apart. That it creates and rewards the disaggregation, the disunum of people who need to be coming together. Let me go back to that chart I showed a minute ago about the political polarization. We can trace that back to, in part, at least the digital experience. So the conclusion that I come to is that we are informed by history, that we know that we create history, and that our challenge is that we have responsibilities created by our moment in history, and that from Gutenberg to Google is the story of how we have confronted this challenge before, and now we get to do it again. And the takeaways, I think, are, as I said, the good old days weren't. There are no prepackaged endings or conclusions in history. It's how you deal with it yourself. Yet others have seen challenges of equal, if not greater, magnitude and solved those problems. And that the winners have been those who advance and deal with the challenges created and meet them head on, rather than trying to retreat to, well, this is how I've always been comfortable. So that's the story of history, and that's the story of today. And I'm grateful to you for inviting me.